Okay. So if you've just joined, welcome. Today's the first masterclass that does not have a PowerPoint presentation. Agnieszka was like, embrace the eternal child. I was like, why not? You know, I've been doing eternal child stuff and just like, oh gosh, been busy traveling. And that's what we're going to be talking about, the last archetype today. Mm. But I wanted to start today by just recapping where we come from, right? The last 7 weeks have been super, super intense. We've done a lot of work. Um, the first week, we looked at the first chapters up until chapter 3 in this book, What's Your Money Personality, right? And we looked at what is ancestral money trauma. We unpacked it, we looked at why we behave the way we behave, how it impacts financial behavior, all of those things, right? What is it that makes us behave the way we behave with money? Why do we feel the way that we feel with money? So we looked at a lot of safety as well, like how feeling safe with money starts to impact our relationship with money. We looked at the nervous system. I also explained allostatic load. Then came the next week, the second part 2 of the masterclass, right? Of the 7-part masterclass. We looked at oppression and money, right? We looked at oppression and how systemic oppression impacts our financial trauma, how it impacts the way that we move through the world, how we make decisions, a lot of things, right? And we also looked at how a systemic trauma contributes to our allostatic load and why we can't talk about money without talking about systemic oppression, right? So, and we also looked at tax. Then the third masterclass, we looked at the sweet one. This is the boundaried one, right? So if you're listening to all this and you're like, I don't know what the hell she's talking about, the good news is you can go back to the emails. Today I'm going to do, when I send out the email, I'll wrap up the email. In the emails, I'll send a link to each of these masterclasses. They're going to be free until next week, right? So listen to them, understand them. Some of them will become podcasts, right? So the third part was about the sweet one, how the sweet one can become the boundaried one. We looked at how does the sweet one behave? What are some of their challenges and their core wounds, right? And how do you start to set boundaries as the sweet one? What are the core wounds that you need to heal, right? Then the fourth masterclass was all about the destroyer archetype. We look at how the destroyer archetype can become the renovator and why do we behave the way that we do in families as destroyers? What is it that impacts our behavior within families? What are we trying to do when we are in the middle of upsetting people and destroying? And why is it so important to have a destroyer archetype within the family? But how do you move when you become the renovator, right? Then the next class was all about the runaway archetype. And it was all about how do you go from the runaway to the grounded seeker so that we can stop running and responding to money in flight mode and running from any kind of challenges and just looking for the things that make us feel good. How do we do that? Then the archetype that we explored last week in depth was this fixer archetype, the archetype that responds to trauma by going into control mode, and how the fixer's role within their family is to learn sovereignty and to give everyone in the family permission to be and to become sovereign. Phew. So that was 7. This was the last 6 weeks, right? Today we are doing the seventh archetype, really one of my favorite archetypes, right? Which is the eternal child archetype. One of my favorite archetypes to explore. Definitely a triggering archetype for both the destroyer archetypes and the fixer archetypes. So before we start, and like I said, I'm embracing my eternal child archetype, and that even though I'm prepared, I didn't get around to doing PowerPoint presentation. Very eternal child, right? So I have my notes, but not the PowerPoint presentation. So we're going to be looking at chapter 11 of the eternal child, which is the eternal child archetype. And then the second last chapter, which is chapter 17, the eternal child becomes the evolving adult. So this archetype, before I even read and explain what the eternal child archetype is, this archetype is extremely triggering for different people, right? Not so much the sweet one archetype. The sweet one, actually, this is me just saying this, right? Sure, there are sweet ones here saying, no, I want the eternal child to evolve. But I have seen things very, very differently when I've observed family dynamics. Sweet one archetypes tend to enable the eternal child archetype, right? So often when a sweet one archetype marries an eternal child archetype, the eternal child has it made. They never have to grow up because the sweet one has no boundaries. They just keep giving and giving and giving. And even though the sweet one is the glue in the family, until they become the boundaried one, the sweet one can literally enable the eternal child's behavior. And that can cause a lot of havoc for the children and the descendants, let alone the adults in the relationship, right? The adults are barely dealing. But often when a sweet one does that, they are forcing a child to become a fixer or a sweet one themselves. So there's many dynamics, there's many things that happen here. Either a child is going to step into the role of, I am going to support my parent to look after the eternal child, right? Who is a parent. So you parentify a child. And one of the fastest ways to parentify a child, right, is that the child as an archetype will become either a fixer or a sweet one. If the child becomes a fixer, it's going to be havoc in the family. Like even the sweet one child, even the sweet one parent is going to struggle, you know? So because the fixer will want to fix this dynamic. And remember, fixers are controlling and fixers are deeply, deeply triggered by eternal children. They can't be peace with a fixer and an eternal child. They can't be peace with a destroyer and eternal child. Runaways and eternal children, like a runaway won't put themselves in that situation. They'll just run away. They'll just be like, oh, this is beyond me now. Let me run, right? But so that's one thing to understand. And then when it comes to, but often what will happen is if a sweet one parent doesn't birth a fixer child, what will often happen is that they may end up with a sweet one child, and that child will carry the load with the parent to support the eternal child parent. So whatever is happening, if you don't deal with that dynamic of the eternal child, what's going to end up happening is one of those kids is going to be parentified and they're going to take on that role. It's really, really challenging. So this is why I say the sweet one often perpetuates that, because with lack of boundaries, they are able to carry the load. They're okay carrying the load of the eternal child, either in marriage or with their siblings or with their parents. They continue to support that dynamic. And it's not an easy thing for a sweet one to hear, right? Because when family members are complaining about an eternal child, we want the eternal child to be the main problem, right? To be the only problem. But the reason why the eternal child may never fully step, one of the reasons why it's very, very challenging for an eternal child to step into their golden archetype of the evolving of the evolving adult. But one of the key reasons is that a sweet one will think that they are supporting, oh my God, my brother, my sister, my child, especially when you start to add in the male-female dynamics, especially if it's a mom who's a sweet one and the eternal child is a son, then it's like, then you've got like all the systemic stuff at play, right, that we talked about in part 2. But at the same time, you've got the sweet one that's like, I don't want to lose family members. I'm the glue in the family. Like, I just want to be loved and loving. So no boundaries. They just give and give and give and give. And there's no real reason for the eternal child to then grow up and become an adult. So they can stay at home forever. So I've been talking a lot about this particular archetype. What does it even mean? Please feel free to type in the comment section as usual. If you have any questions or it's resonating, yeah. And I know it's a hard thing for a lot of sweet ones to hear this, right? So the eternal child in page 196 of the book, I say, the eternal child is the one who never grows up and is always financially supported and looked after. They never achieve financial independence and are cooked for, have their clothes washed, and don't really hold down a job. Even when they do, they always run out of money and need money mid-month. Essentially, their inner child is simply asking to be parented and will force their parents to parent them right in adulthood. This frustrates everyone. So let me just quickly plug my laptop. Sorry, guys. It is plugged. I didn't plug it fully. Yeah. Okay. Yes, it is charging. So the eternal child archetype is almost like the Peter Pan archetype. Is like what in psychology they call the Peter Pan archetype, right? It's the people, men and women who grow up physically, but never grow up emotionally and mentally, right? So people hold down, this is the archetype that they can hold down a job. They may be very, very smart because children are smart, right? So they're very, very smart, super intelligent, but they may struggle for most of their lives, if not the rest of their lives, with adulting things, right? And what I mean by adulting things, it's like taking responsibility for your finances, paying your rent, buying a car, filling up gas, like putting like life insurance, doing all the things that adults do, right? That you need to do as an adult. So even if they grow up and have like jobs as CEOs, you'll find that sometimes they'll want to live with their mom or dad and their parents, right? They grow up, but they have a hard time moving out of home even. And even though they hold these high profile jobs, they can still be running out of money and always, always need to borrow money from family members. So I know quite a few clients that of mine that are challenged by this. Sorry, I'm just looking at the light. Oh, it's very sunny in the Cape, right? So for us, 7 p.m. is like not even the start of sunset. It's still like really afternoon. So it's not for the eternal child archetype, it is all about having fun and being a child, right? So a person is behaving like they're 4 years old, behaving like they're 15 years old, behaving like they're 16-year-olds. So you can, like I talked about my uncle, right, who was, by the way, a runaway archetype and also an eternal child archetype, how when money came in, he didn't feel safe with money, but he spent money as fast as possible, right? And then there was no money left at the end of the month. By the 7th of the month, he was borrowing money from my grandmother, right? Because like my grandmother was his mother, right? So he was still going back to my grandmother, even though he was making, not even a joke, 100 times more than she was getting as a pensioner. But she was still having to make a lot of the decisions in his life, right? Helping him with everything because again, eternal children, it's not about how much money you're making, it's about how evolved you are as an adult or how much you've stepped into adulthood, right? And for most women, we always talk about the Peter Pan complex that, oh my gosh, the guy has grown up, right? In relationships, you're dating a grown man, but he can't cook, he can't clean, he can't do all these other things, can't budget, and you find yourself parenting, right? Again, examples of the eternal child. So, huge thing, right? Women can also be eternal children, like you never grow up, you never get out, you never move out of home, you barely pay your own rent, if ever, you're always looked after. That is essentially what an eternal child is. You are always looked after. Everyone else is looking after you, everyone else is catering to you, right? You don't know how to do your bills. Financial advisory stuff is just not a thing that you even think about. And like when you get paid, the first thing that you do when you're an eternal child is you think cars, you think toys, you think cars, boats, like toys, you think clothes. That's the inner teen, right? You think branding things. You're not thinking, let me sit down and write down rent, mortgage, like I don't know, pay the helper, pay the nanny. That's not top of the list because children don't think like that about money. They think first and foremost, how can I have fun? Listen, fun and pleasure with money is important, but we also have to get the basics out of the way, right? And if you've dealt with an eternal child, you know how frustrating it is. And I always say to people, it's because you can't reason with children, especially when children think they know and they know best. And in that moment when they have money, you cannot reason with them at all. And even when they don't have money, right? Because you're dealing with the child. And what children want is toys, it's sweets. When they go grocery shopping, they are buying where we would buy bread and cereal and rice and pasta and vegetables and all of that. Eternal children walk into a grocery store and they buy ice cream, they buy like chips, they buy sweets, right? And they are the fun parent when you're parenting with them and you look like you are the not so fun parent because they can relate to children. It's all children, you know? So they can have fun, they can spend money without fear, without worries about tomorrow because that's just who they are. And we tend to then want to get upset and have like a fight with eternal children. You're never really going to win. And also because a lot of that is the trauma responses, right? So we talked in the last few weeks about the trauma responses of all the archetypes. So how does one grow up physically, but never grow up emotionally and mentally, you know? And sometimes you can see when you talk to this person that there's just like they still stuck in teen years. It's all about party. It's all about whatever. And they struggle. And another thing, eternal children, this is a huge thing, especially in South Africa, right? Eternal children struggle to parent. They cannot, when they are parents, they cannot parent. Why? Because children don't parent. Children are parented. But a lot of, like, we have a lot of eternal children who become parents, and then we wonder, how do they leave their kids with their mothers, leave their kids with spouses, and just never look back and feel nothing? Because the eternal child is still a child themselves. So they feel like the parenting should be done for them. The idea of stepping in, parenting, going to PTAs, figuring out schooling, sitting down every day and doing the same thing of homework, going like over and over, budgeting for the children, all of that doesn't work. And they are also very selfish, right? Because children are by nature selfish, right? Very few children are like, when you have fixer children and sweet child children, they are very like, oh yes, we're very giving. We are aware. We're working for the greater good of the family, for others. But most children, when children are children, it's like things are being taken care of for them, right? So it can be very frustrating and very triggering for that very reason, right? So the why does the eternal, so back to why is it that the eternal child is behaving like this? Well, firstly, the eternal child's trauma response is going into freeze mode, right? So often something happened in childhood and we all figured out how to get over the thing, or we're all stuck in different trauma responses, right? And different trauma events that happened to us. But the eternal child, the trauma was so overwhelming, they didn't figure out how to process it. They didn't fight it. They didn't go into flight mode. They didn't go into fawn mode. They didn't try to control anything. What they just did was they just remained stuck at that point. So in that moment, something happened and they almost did not grow up. It's like stunted or arrested development, right? Where other people figured out how, even though with this trauma and the wounded inner child, they could continue to move forward, they just had a hard time going beyond that. They just couldn't. There was no anything. So they are just stuck there. And one of the roles, the eternal child is just like all the archetypes, the eternal child has a very important role within the family, albeit very frustrating for most of us, right? So the role in page 197, I say the role of the eternal child is to mirror everyone in the family, the parts of them that were denied love, parenting, and compassion. This may be because the parent left, wasn't able to parent, didn't have parenting skills, or passed on. So the eternal child feels lack of parenting the most. So remember that we all respond to trauma very differently. And I hear a lot of people say, but we all had the same upbringing. We all suffered the most. Mom left all of us, all of that. Yes, although that is true, we all have a different allostatic load, right? We all have a different capacity. And remember, we are all born into the family with different roles. We all have different trauma responses. So where a fixer would look at the situation, mom left, all of that, siblings need help, a fixer would step up and just go into control, take control, work, go to school all at the same time, look after the siblings, all of that. The eternal child just didn't have that capacity, right? The way they process the trauma was just really, really differently. So it becomes very, very challenging for them to move beyond that. So within a family, the eternal child forces us all to basically go to look at them and say, where in the family did some of the deepest traumas happen, or when, not where, right? When, at which time period did they happen? And can we unravel that? Right? Can we start to unravel that, look at it, and heal it? But obviously, most of us are not living like that, right? We're just like, we just want this person to get up, get over it, and just become a full adult. I know it seems like I'm defending the eternal child. I am not. I'm just explaining how they came to be who they are, right? And trust me, as a destroyer archetype, I'm not great with the eternal child either, right? So the eternal child really forces us to look back into the family dynamic and to say, okay, let's see when this trauma happened and then start to unpack it, which is, in their own way, this is what the destroyer is trying to do, right? The destroyer tries to mirror it, but they mirror it in a very violent way. They mirror the trauma and everything that's happening in a very violent way. And that, like, they come at you, they keep bringing it up, they keep throwing it in your face. The eternal child also mirrors it, but they mirror it by staying stuck in it, right? And it doesn't look like they're staying stuck in it. Most eternal children look like they are having fun, because most times children do have fun anyway, right? So they are partying, they're drinking, they're just doing the very most. But at some point, we can see when someone gets to be their 50s or 60s and they're still doing those same things from childhood that most of us have outgrown from our teens, that rebellion, all of that, that no, man, this is not okay. And then we can see that, no, this is really, really sad, right? And that there's something more there. So that's what the eternal child is mirroring. So how do you heal it? Which most people always ask me. It's a very, very challenging thing. The family as a whole, because firstly, the eternal child is stuck there because of something happening around family dynamics, and then they needed the parent. So one of the easiest things, this is why often this is, before I even go into my next sentence, this is why often the eternal child is also very much connected to their parents. So if you've dealt with eternal children, then you know, especially, and I think one of my friends always says, Van, you have to remember that like the deepest form of the eternal child that we have is sometimes the mother-son dynamic, right? Where the mom is the sweet one or the eternal child can be a son, right? And one of the things that you tend to see is how like they will go more towards the parent, whichever parent, right? And they'll be like clinging to them and refusing to grow up. Why? Because they're looking for that reparenting of their inner child and that healing in a way, right? So often and this is so critical, right? Because the way that sometimes we're parented isn't the way that we need to be parented in order to heal. So they need their feelings validated, they need their pain validated, and they need that pain to be seen. And often that doesn't happen in families where the parent is willing to step in and say to a child, even if it's a grown man or woman in their 30s or 40s, that I see you, I'm so sorry, because that's the real healing that they need. Like, how can I help you? How can I be here for you? If they are willing to receive it, right? So I guess the other thing is for the rest of the family members to step in and to validate, and without doing what the sweet one does. Again, that's on like the eternal child archetype is a very challenging archetype. I myself have not cracked it because they have to be willing to heal, right? That's true of all the archetypes, but a lot of the archetypes are more willing to self-reflect and to look in the mirror, especially when it's their primary archetype and they can see there's a problem. But again, children are just having fun, right? So there's a lot of, they have to come to the point where they also start to see that, you know what, I do need help. And then like family members need to then validate that there is pain there, not you were given everything in childhood. What do you have to cry about? We have the same upbringing. No, because their pain is their pain and it's very unique. It's unique to them, right? Even if we all felt that pain, we process it differently. So there's a need to validate that, right? So it's almost like you allow the child to feel seen, to be validated, and through doing that, they start to almost like the Zulu word for it is like bayahlambuluka, right? Which just means like they kind of become free and they start to free themselves a bit more, right? And that's really, really helpful. But the biggest blocks to the expansion for the eternal child, right? This is very, very interesting, is their core wounds. One of the core wounds of the eternal child is they stuck in blame mode. They are so hurt when they look at their lives in adulthood, they blame everything outside of them. Mainly because if you think about how children operate, right? Children, when they don't usually have the capacity to self-reflect. I mean, you've got brilliant children who can self-reflect, right? Usually fixers, destroyer archetypes, self-reflect, they go back, they look at themselves, but it's not, and not even a lot of children have that capacity, right? Not even a lot of sweet ones or, sorry, not even a lot of fixers or sweet ones. Why do I say sweet ones? Fixers and destroyers have that capability, right? But there has to be an element of self-reflection. And most children don't self-reflect like that, right? So children tend to internalize when they look at certain things, they go, wow. So there's two ways that the eternal child responds to the trauma that they experience in childhood. One, I blame external environments. It's like, I blame my parents, I blame everyone else. The next is, this is like an act of God. It's beyond me. They can see that, like, well, I was born poor, or certain things happen to make us poor, and that's not mom or dad's fault. Things just happen, a war started, whatever happened. So who do you blame in that case? You blame the divine, right? So the eternal child has a deep God wound as well. For different reasons to the fixer, right? The fixer has a God wound because they have a hard time surrendering to the divine, right? They just like, I have to do everything myself. I am doing it all alone. I carry the weight of the world on my shoulders. No one shows up for me, so I'm going to show up for myself and I'm going to show up for everyone because the adults are chaotic. Do you see how that's like the extreme opposite? The eternal child is on God is unfair. This has been such an unfair process to me. Life has been unfair. It's a lot of like victim mode, right? So there's a lot of feelings of powerlessness that even if I do start a thing, it won't work out. There's a lot of fear of the punishment of the divine as well. So if I do something, because again, children believe a lot in divine punishment. They don't, again, not a lot of like questioning because we're taught certain things. So there's also the feeling that you're being punished. Everything is unfair. Everything is out of your hands. So there's a lot of blame. And as a result of this God wound, whichever one it is, right? Like for the eternal child, where the fixer won't have resentment because of the God wound, the fixer would have resentment and anger at adults in this current moment. They'll be like, I resent you that I had to carry you and that you're not following my instructions, right? The eternal child feels blame and resentment towards the parents. And so you sometimes end up with an angry child, right? Where you end up with the angry eternal child, which the vengeful child. So that's one of their core wounds, the vengeful child. They look at this, they say, life has been unfair to me. Other people have been given more than I've been given, right? So obviously I was never given the same opportunities. They'll even look at their fixer siblings and say, oh, well, you must have been given more than I was given. So there's a lot of resentment, there's a lot of blame, there's a lot of envy there as well. But they will then become vengeful, right? And when the eternal child is operating from the vengeful child, they will actively block their own progress in order to punish everybody. So that, because they know, especially if they know that if they don't succeed, their mom or dad will continue to look after them. They will go into the vengeful child, will take over that part of them that feels resentful, blameful. I wasn't given the same amount as everyone else. The divine was unfair to me, etc., right? What will often happen is that vengeful child will literally, because they want to be parented and they want the same opportunities or they want to punish everybody, they will stop their progress in order to punish everybody by keeping everybody stuck and centered around them so that they can then be parented and given everything that they were denied as children, right? Remember, this is not the adult that is consciously making this decision. This is an adult who is constantly hijacked by that childhood version of them, right? And you all know when an eternal child is really, really being hijacked by their vengeful child, they'll often bring it up. They don't keep it silent, right? They'll bring up what happened in childhood, what happened in their teens, who did what, how they were denied certain opportunities. I mean, you'll be like, yo, it's like 2 or 3 decades later, let it go. But for them, it's as recent as today, because remember, that is the child that is hijacking them. So if you've ever dealt with an eternal child, you will know what that feels like because they'll constantly remind you. And they don't look at success in the way that all the other archetypes look at success, that you do something and that's how you're getting successful. The eternal child looks at somehow someone they were given a lucky break, all of that, because children don't reason to the full capacity and children don't know, right? They don't know much about like, what is the process of buying a house, having like 3 months pay slips, all of those things. That's not a thing for them, right? So You'll maybe hear when they get drunk, they'll recount childhood stories, they'll recount teen stories, all of that, because that's mainly the sub-personalities that are running the show, right? So for most of us, we may have moved on, but it's really, really challenging for them, right? So how do we heal the vengeful child so that like that part of the eternal child can actually start to move forward and start to make like something of themselves, right? So that they're not stuck trying to punish everybody else by getting them to look after them financially. One of the easiest ways for adults to punish other adults is financially, by the way. And children are very perceptive, right? They may not know what they don't know, right? But they are perceptive. They're like, wait, money is a trigger for the adult. So the eternal child also sometimes knows that, wait, if I don't have money, then this person will get angry. And at an unconscious level, that is how I punish them. And that's also how I make sure that they stay parenting me. So even if mom has paid for everything throughout high school, throughout university, if I don't get a job, she always has to parent me until, you know? So that's one way to make sure that I am never without a parent because they have to constantly look after me, right? So how do we heal the vengeful child? If you are an eternal child, you have to start screaming out that pain. You have to start letting out that anger. Scream into pillows, scream that pain, journal, everything. Just like feel into your anger. Have anger fairs, write angry letters, burn them, do everything that you need to do to be able to move beyond that anger, because anger often masks grief, right? Underneath that anger is grief and sadness. So whatever it is that you're angry about, be it the divine and how horrible the divine has been, be it like your parents not getting similar opportunities as your siblings, or that you feel like your siblings were given better looks than you, given more intelligence than you, all of that. Scream it out, write it down, get it out of your system, purge it, because that's going to help you and help that child release that anger, release that feeling of unfairness, so that the adult you can start to process it and start to step in. And once the adult you starts to take over, you start to realize that, listen, all of us are given different opportunities in life. Some people are prettier, some people have more sex appeal, some people are more intelligent, some people are better athletes. Everyone has something, right? Some people seem like they've got it all, but really they've had like a crappy childhood, or they don't have like great monetary skills or something. Whatever it is, get it out so that you can tap into your own innate abilities and you can start to work with your adult self, right? And also heal the God wound. Really, really focus on healing the God wound, especially the vow to prove the unfairness of God, because often the eternal child also stops themselves from expanding financially in order to prove how God was unfair to them or their parents or their families, right? So, or their family. So what they'll do is they'll block, and when you are operating from the vow to prove the unfairness of God, so this is a vow that is only within the Money Magic course, right? We unpack it, we heal it only within the Money Magic course. You guys can Google it, it won't come up anyway, right? It's the God wound, all this work that I'm talking about around the God wound, that is all within the Money Magic course. It's all my own body of work. But often what happens with the eternal child, when we have this vow, when they have this vow to prove the unfairness of God, they refuse to allow more, to expand, and even to work with the divine. Because if you think about what divinity is about just creation, expansion, really seeing yourself. It's everything, right? It's the good, the bad, the ugly. I know people don't want to hear that because they just think that divinity is just like this one thing. But divinity is, if we are made in the image of the divine, then divinity has some of our characteristics, right? So it's a vengeful. It's like, I mean, people in the Christian faith talk about the vengeful God, right? And a God that is the jealous God, all of that. All these are also human emotions, right? We are the shadow and the light, right? So divinity is all of that. But also one of the most amazing things about divinity is its ability to create, right? To keep creating, to be expensive. When you look at everything, it's just like expensive. Whatever your view of divinity is, right? It's all about, it's that ability to create, to birth things, all of that. So when we deny divinity within ourselves and we refuse to see our own divinity, it becomes challenging to see our own power and our own ability to create and to expand, right? And when we are angry at the divine, because we are made in the image of the divine, we are also going to be angry at ourselves. It is impossible to be angry at the divine and not be angry at yourself, because you yourself are divinity and you are a piece of divinity, right? So when the eternal child is operating from the vow to prove the unfairness of God, everything is operating from, I am going to struggle and hold myself in suffering so that everybody can see how unfair God has been to me, right? So I've known people who would say, no one has suffered more than me in this world, right? And that means that, like, wow, you're here proving that no one has suffered more than you. Like the world, again, expansive. There's so much suffering, but in this world, there's also so much good, so much expansion. It's everything, right? And in Buddhism, they talk about the laws of polarity, which is like for whatever good there is, there's also a bad. So there are always opposite forces at play. And that's just like, this universe is a balancing act. But when the eternal child is operating from the vow to prove the unfairness of God, it will be very, very hard for them to manifest anything. It becomes very hard, no matter how much money they are making. It becomes hard for them to show what they've done with that money. Because remember, anything that is evidence that the world has been good to you, that divinity has been good to you, that you've been blessed in any way, has to be erased because you are on a path to prove how unfair the world was. And again, that is deeply linked to the blame, the vengeful child. Others have had it easier. I didn't have it. Guys, circumstances are circumstances, right? A person, we're all dealt a different hand in this world. And not everyone is dealt like a great hand, right? But when we keep ourselves stuck in that blame and in that feeling of unfairness and we refuse to move forward, the person that gets hurt the most, it's us. And often also the people that are looking after us and are supporting us, because then we're not doing our part. And then they end up having to be stuck with us in that pain, looking after us in that pain. So, how does one become an evolving adult? Now that like you have moved into, you're now understanding what causes the eternal child to behave the way they do and their role within the family, how does the eternal child start to heal and move into the golden archetype of the evolving adult? Well, glad to ask. Well, glad you guys asked. I'm not sure if you even asked, right? But the evolving adult is exactly what it says, right? Is that the eternal child slowly starts when they start to heal, especially when they heal the God wound, the vow to prove the unfairness of God in particular, when they start to heal that vengeful child, start to connect with their inner child, either by making the conscious decision to start reparenting their inner child, their hurt inner child, or by other family members stepping in and helping mirror that and validating their pain and saying, yes, we see you, instead of screaming, oh my God, you're spending so much money. Everybody is supporting you. Everything revolves around you. Like really taking the time to look at them, see them, validate them. They start to feel heard. They start to feel seen. They can start to do adult things, right? They can start to take on more responsibility. It feels less scary and it feels less beneficial for them to stay within child mode because again the child is starting to heal, so this child no longer feels like they need to hijack the adult in order to be seen, in order for their pain to be validated, because all of that is happening. Again, a very, very challenging thing within families because most of us have our own lives to live, right? Most of us are trying to process our own trauma. When one person is coming up with their trauma and they're expecting us to all focus on them, validate their trauma, keep parenting them, it can be extremely triggering. It can be extremely hard. And I know a lot of family members get exhausted because they're like, but I didn't have that opportunity, right? And sometimes it's hard because maybe the eternal child is way older than you, right? Maybe they're an uncle, maybe they're a mother, maybe they're a father, and then it just doesn't feel like it's your responsibility, right? So I can appreciate that. I feel, I mean, like I said, I'm also deeply triggered by the eternal child. It's not like I am winning at this game, even though I know what would heal and what would help. It is very, very challenging. I instantly move into my runaway archetype and I'm like, oh, this is too much. Like, I don't want to have to do the work for you and mother you in that way. I think I'm going to run away for a minute, right? So, yeah, in chapter 17, page 305, I say, while the role of the eternal child is to mirror to everyone in the family the parts of them that were denied love, parenting, and compassion, the role of the evolving adult is to remind us that we are not defined by our trauma, to show us that healing and growth are indeed possible, and to remind us to be compassionate with ourselves on this life journey. When the eternal child starts to heal parts of themselves that they were denied, love, parenting, and compassion, they begin to embody the evolving adult, right? So it's not an easy decision to start adulting. And I think we can all agree that adulting can be a really, really hard decision. So sometimes when the eternal child goes on this journey, it may feel like all their peers have moved forward and have left them behind. One of the things that I see a lot that happens within our families when it comes to eternal children, and it happens a lot in our mother's generations, right? In our mother's generation, our dad's generation, that generation, they start to compare the children. They'll be like, your sibling is doing this, why can't you? Your cousin is doing this, why can't you? Again, it's causing more harm at times, right? Not at times, all the time. Let's be honest. It's causing a lot of harm, right? Because now this, instead of validating the pain, instead of having conversations, instead of suggesting therapy, instead of all of those things, we're like now going into comparison mode. So one of the things to do is to really work with the eternal child. And once they start moving into the evolving adult stage, remember that they're starting from scratch. They still have to learn, even though they may have been in school. Parts of them were probably hijacked by their child, by their inner child or their inner teens. So they probably didn't even pay attention to all the practical adulting stuff. So one of the things that we want to do when we see them start to do adult stuff, and I know this feels hard, I am so guilty of this because one of the things I always say is the bar is in hell, and I know that I'm dealing with an eternal child. And like part of me, I often have to remind myself not to be so mean, right? Because I'll be like, but why am I clapping for them to do when they have to do adult things? Yes, everybody, we've been paying rent since, like some of us have been paying rent since our teens. Like, why am I clapping for you for going to pay rent when you're 40 and you should have moved out a while ago? All of those things. I've had to learn to like tone that all the way down, even though you feel like, oh my gosh, you're starting to pay groceries. Like I've been buying groceries for like 20 years. Why should we be celebrating you? We celebrate because they are making small steps. This is the parts of themselves that are just starting to slowly move into adulthood. Just like some of us started doing some of these things at a very young age in our late teens, early 20s, all of that, or even early teens. the evolving adult may only be starting now as they are healing their eternal child, like now in their 40s. And yes, they may have done a lot of damage. They may not have parented their kids, all of that. This is all stuff that should be brought up, and there should be things that are done to make them aware that like they have to rectify that. But we can also support them on that journey. And it's not financial support. That's one of the first things I say to people. Do not give financial support to the eternal child that is going into evolving adult stage, right? I mean, financial support, if someone's going for a job interview, they need cab money, they need to take an Uber, they need to go buy a suit. Obviously, that's like one way. But now where, especially, this is for the sweet ones, right? Especially now when someone is like trying to figure out their budget, trying to figure out their day-to-day expenses, and then you're like, oh, but let me help you, you're trying. No, allow them to adult so that they can figure it out themselves. They need to fail and get up and build that muscle so that they can fully step into adulthood. The problem comes with the sweet ones, right? And I've seen this so much with eternal child sons and sweet one mothers, where like a son is trying to build themselves into adulthood, and then the mother steps in instantly. No, my son can't suffer. My son can't struggle. I need to cook for my son. It's like, no, allow this person to go into adulthood and learn. Let them make some bad meals. Let them buy some make some terrible grocery choices, because this is how we all learn. But if you keep stepping in, you keep triggering those parts of them that need to be mothered and that were like clinging on for dear life. So this is, I know it sounds like tough love, but this is also love. It's like you can validate a person, cheer them on without needing to step in and do it for them. So you're giving them the opportunity to really grow up and adult. Because think about what it has taken for all of us to adult, right? We've had to make bad money mistakes. We've had to lose money. We've had to figure out how we know that like, oh, this doesn't work. The way that we've been doing budgeting didn't work is because we've been budgeting in different ways throughout, right? And so we could see this is not the way that this works. I need to do something else. And I know it's really, really hard. And often a lot of family members then get excited, especially the sweet one archetype, and sometimes the fixer, because there's nothing as exciting to a fixer to see an eternal child start to step into evolving adult. Watch the fixer be like, even if you want to buy a house, I will match you and I will buy you a house. That's fixer vibes sometimes, right? Because then they're like, I can control this evolution and make sure that it keeps going on, right? Whereas the sweet one will be overly helpful as well, right? The fixer will definitely start to step in and love the eternal child archetype when they start to move into the evolving adults, right? So I'm just going to switch on my lights, guys. I got here and I just ran to the house. So nothing for the eternal child to start stepping into the evolving adult, they have to learn to regulate their nervous systems. But unlike the runaway, the big thing isn't safety. It's about letting the anger out, letting the unfairness out, a lot of blame. They carry a lot of resentment, So it can be really, really challenging. Yeah, but I think that's basically the bulk of it. And then one of the things that I would say is when the eternal child starts to become the evolving adult, what I've seen with this archetype, again, I stand corrected. A lot of these archetypes can heal. We are all constantly evolving, but often with the eternal child archetype that then goes into the evolving adult archetype, don't expect them to build massive amounts of wealth. They are not the fixer archetype, right? They are not a destroyer archetype, right? They are not any of the other archetypes. They are an archetype that is working to just get to managing adulthood, managing parenting without slipping back into the habits of the child and into habits of childhood. So it may take an evolving adult a while to even think in terms of like, let's build an investment portfolio, property portfolio. It's amazing when they get into things like retirement annuities, like really low risk, and they start saving. That's something to really be celebrated, right? This is not to say this archetype cannot create massive wealth, but just to say let them have their own pace. And if you are an eternal child archetype, really celebrating your own pace, and you will get where you need to go, right? You'll eventually figure out your own way. It's really, really challenging because some people have been adulting for longer than others. And I think that the eternal child archetype is still trying to figure out adulting in maybe their 40s, their 50s. They're still trying to figure out how to pay the rent, how to keep the lights on. And that's okay. It doesn't mean you'll never get there. This is where the bank account challenge also works very, very well for the eternal child, because it keeps bringing you into your body. It keeps teaching you how to regulate your nervous system. You can focus on your breath. You can focus on like looking at your budget, all of that. It is extremely powerful, right? So in closing, one of the things that I will say is I'm going to read from page 311 of this book. And I say, when the evolving adult starts to heal the God wound, they reclaim their power because they realize that they were all responsible for our own lives, no matter how raw a deal we got. Remember that, no matter how raw a deal we got, right? Regardless of how unfair life has been, at the end of the day, the life we were given is the life we have to work with and make the best of. And it's true. Life can be brutal, but if we get stuck in the story, lamenting how unfair life is, we spend our energy looking for someone or something to blame or stay angry at, which can stagnate us. So thank you so much, guys. As usual, I'll be taking comments. I'll be taking questions. Hi, Nonjanjambo. Feel free to type in the comment section. Or if you want, you can lift your hand, ask any questions. This is the last masterclass. So if you have any burning questions about any of the archetypes, feel free. About any of the masterclasses we had, feel free to ask. So Tandazo, you say, is it possible to be stuck in a childhood trauma but not act out the usual way, where one becomes too good and avoids causing any kind of stir problems and avoids experimenting like other people? So Tandazo, I'm taking it you didn't attend the Suite One class, right? So that's the third class. That is called, what you've just described is the Suite One archetype. And in that archetype, you respond to trauma by going into fawning mode. So I recommend going to that archetype and really listening to it. Going back to that masterclass, how the Suite One becomes the boundaried one. That masterclass is the one where I unpack that trauma response. What you've just described is fawning, right? So Katlego, you say, my mom and my youngest brother have that dynamic. He's an eternal child, and I think they just trigger one another. My mom experienced a lot of trauma when she was pregnant with him. Lol, laughing at the God wound, because my brother is the most active person in our Anglican church, but he does carry a lot of resentment towards my mother. Very, very deep. And you say he didn't get the same opportunities as the rest of us because my dad passed away when he was 4. Yeah. And is your brother aware of that, Katlego? Does he like bring it up, or is it just subconscious because he's just like hiding it? So another thing with the God wound, you guys, like it's got nothing to do with your faith. Like, it is possible some of the people that have some of the deepest God wounds are some of the most religious people, you know? And it's really, really interesting to observe. So some of the most spiritual people, some of the most religious people carry some of the most deepest God wounds. And a huge part of that is because you wouldn't have a God wound if you weren't aware of something greater than yourself, right? But because you're aware that there's something greater than yourself, you can beef with that with that thing, right? People that don't know or don't care and don't believe there's something greater, they have no reason to have beef with something that they don't believe exists, right? So those of us that believe that there's something more to this world and that there's something greater tend to have the deepest God wounds, and they tend to beef with that version of they tend to beef with that um divine being, right? Whatever you consider it to be, even if it's mountains, the ocean, the sky, whatever it is, right? So does anyone have any questions before I close off today's session? Any questions at all? And then otherwise, I'm gonna move on. Dumi, you say I feel like I'm slowly becoming an adult. I need support though to fully flourish into one. I somehow don't feel worthy of the support. Oh, sending you deep hugs, Dumi, right? Um, Everyone needs support becoming an adult, to be honest, except maybe fixers. They like, and maybe even sweet ones, right? They kind of like these two archetypes are parentified at a young age. So it's not that they don't need support. They do want support and they do need it, but they don't like, um, how do I put it? It's like they can thrive without it. Not, well, the fixer, not the sweet one. Mm-mm. The fixer can continue to live without it, financially, but I think emotionally, the fixer holds a lot of resentment because they don't feel supported. And so it comes out in like very like, oh, angry ways. I mean, all of us need support, right? So yeah, none of the archetypes can do without support. Everyone needs support. It's just different support for different people. So to me, say, so I don't have the support. My friends are MIA and family too. How do I position myself to have an ecosystem that is supportive? That is a very, very beautiful question to me, right? One of the ways that we support ourselves to get support is to go looking for support, actively looking for support, right? So you can either go, when you go looking for support, it's that you either go get a coach, right? You get a therapist, you find mastermind groups. Some people join hiking groups. You find a hobby group where you feel like you can be supported with through emotionally by doing that hobby, right? But sometimes you have to pay for support and you figure out what kind of support do I need? Because not all support is necessarily emotional support, right? So when you feel like your friends are MIA, maybe you don't need emotional support, and maybe what you need is emotional support as well. You go to therapy and you figure out how do you get that emotional support. One of the easiest ways for me was to join mastermind groups when I was struggling to get support and in terms of building a business, right? Mainly because I thought people were MIA and didn't care about me having a business and how I ran my business, all of that. What it was is I realized that a lot of people didn't even understand what I was trying to do. So one of the things that I did was I ended up looking for support through coaches, which was really, really helpful. Because then I realized that if I have someone at the other end, they are supporting me on my business journey, right, and my financial journey. And I also joined masterminds where I started to meet people. In fact, my friend Agnieszka here, right, who's visiting. Some of you, if you logged in early, you saw her moving up and down, right? She's from Canada. We met in a mastermind. We became friends. She was in Canada. I was in Sri Lanka. Through the mastermind, we started talking, we started connecting. We became very, very close friends. I mean, she's been visiting. She arrived here on the 7th of November, right? On the 8th of November, sorry. And we've been traveling together. We are in each other's spaces, in each other's faces. We would talk all the time, constantly, right? And now we're like seeing each other in person and we're becoming friends. So I've made some of my greatest friendships through paid support, right? So that's been really, really awesome. And that's why I will always advocate for that, right? Because sometimes your friends don't understand your financial journey. They don't understand your business journey. They don't understand your family journey and your family dynamics. But joining masterminds and joining online courses and places like that, you're finding people who are on a similar journey and you can connect with them and you guys can learn to support each other. I hope that makes sense. And then in terms of there's other forms of support, right, that we never ever talk about. Support in terms of household help, right? Support in terms of learning how to fall in love with your body, support in terms of having other people who can cook you good meals. So if you don't have family members that can cook for you, like a lot of my family does not know how to cook vegan food. So support that I've had, even though I'm a great cook and I'm often the one that cooks in my family on Christmas, etc., the support that when I've needed support to feel nurtured, I've hired a chef, right? I've gotten support. So sometimes you don't have to wait to get support from the people around you. I want to encourage you guys to like look at support as something that you can also pay for. I'm a big, big believer in that. I think it has helped my life tremendously. And not just to do one kind particular streamlined part of support. I've often talked about this, that when I was struggling with relationships and I was like, I want to get married, but I don't know, like I'm sucky at relationships. The first thing I did was I got a relationship coach, right? Because I couldn't figure out like, what am I doing wrong with dating? Everyone's making it seem like you kind of like get together with the person and things kind of work out, you click, you have to find that one person with the spark. Through relationship coaching, I was able to learn how to relationship better. I was able to learn how to date, how to do all of those things, right? So that was really, really powerful for me. And you don't have to, and I also think therapy is also really, really great, right? So look for different types of support. Friendships, I recommend going on Facebook, figure out what your hobbies are, right? If you feel like you have no friends, get a hobby. This is how I've always traveled. Honestly, people ask me, how do I make friends in all the countries that I go to? I know what my hobbies are, right? Like I'll join a hiking club. I'll go on Facebook, type in hiking Thailand, hiking Chiang Mai, hiking Da Nang, and like I'll go in there and I'll start figuring out when can I get those activities, right? Where are those activities taking place? And then I'll join those groups, go to the hiking things or go to yoga classes or go to whatever. And that's when I will meet people and we connect purely because we have a common hobby. It's easier to make new friends because you have a common hobby, and it's easier to connect with those people if those hobbies are happening at maybe weekly or twice or three times a week. At least then you're starting to meet those people and you're starting to build those relationships. So new friends, that's one of my tips. I don't know if it works for everyone, but it has worked for me in almost every country, right? In almost every country, I have not struggled to make new friends. If there's no hiking, I join spoken word. I go to open mic sessions. I start doing spoken word poetry. If that's not happening, I'm like, how do we drum? Like, I know nothing about drumming, but I love dancing to drums. Let's go there. If there's none of that, I join meditation groups. There's always something. So what are your many different hobbies, right? That could help. If nothing, take up a hobby. I know people are doing knitting, crocheting. One of my friends does this thing where she's met people by going to not just a book club, because they're not a book club. They go to a reading silently together here in Cape Town. So you meet 30 minutes beforehand, you talk, and then you all disperse into your corners and you just read on your own. I think that's like the best one. I told her I want to go because now I know that like the people I meet there will be crazy about books, and I love books as a writer, right? So new thing to talk about, right? That's how you bond. Tandazo, you say, is it possible for people to avoid excelling financially because they believe God wants them to suffer? Yes, that is called, what is that? It's the God Wound Reloaded. Sorry. The God Wound is kind of a body of work. So I don't always remember the exact names for that. So I have an actual body of work and breath work that works with that particular belief and that particular, and what we call it. Actually, one of my clients named that lesson and that breath work meditation as the God Wound Reloaded. And we work with that, the concept of divine punishment and that God wants you to suffer. But that also can be tied to the vow of service, right? Which is a vow that we make in this life, past life, or ancestrally, in that we should work hard for money or for very little money, right? Or just never be paid. Nantia Jumbo, you say, hi, Van, are these masterclasses available on Wealthy Money? I am recapping while reading the book. Yes, the masterclasses are available on the masterclass replays website. You guys will have access to them on the replays website up until next week, Thursday. I will send out an email with all the links to each and every one of the masterclasses. Take a look at them, listen to them, watch them, do all of the things, right? So they are available for you to go through once more. I hope that helps. No, it's a pleasure, Nantiantambo. And Nantiantambo, you'll always have access to them as a Money Magic student. So if you're a Money Magic student, guys, don't stress. Any of my clients that are in the Money Magic course, you guys, I'm going to add you all to the Masterclass replay course. So you will all have free access to the masterclass replays, to these particular masterclasses. You will never have to look for them on podcasts. You'll be able to just get access to them. Yeah, it's a pleasure. Does anyone else have any more questions? This is our final masterclass. I'll be doing masterclasses again, maybe every month, but it won't be around the book, right? It won't be unpacking as in depth for this book. If you want this book, Petunia, you say thank you, very insightful. It's a pleasure, Petunia. So if you guys want this book, it is available internationally. It's called What's Your Money Personality? Changing the Way That Black Families Manage Their Finances. It is 350 pages long. I have not shared a lot from the book, right? So the book is quite lengthy, it's quite in depth. It will give you more information than I could give in these masterclasses. Just like with all my courses, you will never, I will never be able to cover in any of my masterclass the amount of stuff that I cover in my courses, especially because we do work in depth, right? We do breath work, we do meditations, we do EFT tapping, all of that. So if this is sounding like something that you want to be part of and you're looking for one-on-one work, I still have one. I thought I was going to end up with like 2 coaching spots in December, but one of my clients just re-signed as a client, which is kind of nice. She's like, nope, I'm not giving up on the coaching because she's had such cool breakthroughs. So if you're interested in me holding space with you, one-on-one coaching, I do still have that one coaching spot open. So reach out to me. Let's have a conversation. I charge $10,000 upfront or 176,000 Rand upfront to work with me for 4 months. Or you can pay in monthly installments, which is $3,000 per month, which is about 56,000 Rand, I think, a month over 4 months. So you pay, instead of paying $10,000 upfront, you pay $3,000 a month over 4 months. And you get a discount when you pay upfront. So that means when you pay upfront, you get a discount of $2,000 or 35,000 Rand. Right? So if this is sounding exciting to you, reach out to me in my coaching. I do a lot of work around, the work is really around expansion, increasing visibility, increasing income, being able to charge for your products and services, being able to work in the way that you want to work. I'm sure you guys have, I sent out an email. I've been traveling for the last 22 days, but I've been able to work as I travel and continue to make money, even doing speeches for corporates, doing events, all of that. So being able to build a business that actually works with your lifestyle, not building your lifestyle around a business or building your or making money in a way that basically making your life is the center. What I teach is how to center your life and then everything else around that, as opposed to letting your life revolve around how you make money. How do you do that? Because that for me is true freedom. It's what allows you to start building financial freedom, but it's also what allows you to take back your time. It's about having time freedom, that you don't feel like you can't do certain things because you don't have the ability, you don't have the freedom to do that, right? Really being able to live the life that you want, which for me is that's what it means to live your best life, to be able to reclaim your time and be able to build your entire way of making money and your financial choices around your life, as opposed to letting how much money you have and money be the dictator of the kind of life that you want to live. Right? So if this is sounding exciting to you and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to be part of this, feel free to hit me up, message me, right? You can just click reply to any of the emails that I've sent. Feel free to just hit reply or just message me on Instagram or Facebook, any of that. If you're in this masterclass, it's because you have my contact, you've received an email from me. So just hit reply to my emails. So yeah, guys, I hope these classes have been helpful. This has been part 7 of the 7-part masterclass series on what's your money personality. And Tanda, so you say, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and insight. There's no going back now. There's absolutely no going back now. Thank you, Gugule.
Hi,
Thank you, Petunia. Thank you, guys.
hi there.
Bye.
Hi there.
Bye.
Hi there.
Bye. No, Jambo. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much, Ben.
Bye. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Ben.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye. Bye. Bye.